just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage.
And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
Once they lose trust in their leaders, in mainstream media, in political institutions, in each other, in the possibility of truth, the game's won.
Broken Truth, I'm John Davidson, and today we have Major Tom Haviland, who is a data analyst and is probably best known for his research into these unusual blood clots that have been popping up in the last 5 years, which are totally unrelated to the vaccines, right?
I don't think so. There's a strong correlation between the first appearance of these, John, and the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines.
Yeah, we've done a couple of interviews across different platforms and, followed this research that you've been doing. And these came from Alabama?
Yeah, and embalmer Richard Hirschman, who was one of the 6 or 7 embalmers in that movie, died suddenly.
Okay.
Richard came forward, and that was a fairly controversial film, in fact.
Sure.
It came out in the week of Thanksgiving of November of 2022.
Oh.
And I watched that movie the night it premiered, and I saw these 6 or 7 embalmers in this hour documentary saying they were pulling strange white fibrous clots out of the veins and arteries of their corpses, and they had been doing so for about the last year or so. It all started for them in the middle of 2021. So I wasn't sure whether they were a bunch of kooks or not.
Right.
So I contacted the Ohio Embalmers Association, located in Cincinnati, Ohio, about an hour south of where I live in Dayton.
Yeah.
The very next day after watching the movie the night it premiered, because I figured no reporter would chase after the story. So I talked to their now president, Mr. Woody Wilson, who runs his own funeral home up in Marysville, Ohio, about an hour north of where I live in Dayton, and he does his own embalming. A lot of funeral directors do their own embalming.
Yeah.
Woody told me, Tom, I'm seeing the white fibrous clots too.
Wow.
So I said, wow, I now have an official officer and the now president of the Ohio Embalmers Association corroborating these 6 or 7 embalmers that said they were seeing this phenomenon. So right then and there, I decided to do a nationwide survey, which I then later on turned into a worldwide survey, including Canada, UK, and Australia and New Zealand, to see how prevalent these clots were. Because I figured I had a sneaking suspicion that the CDC and the FDA would not be looking at this problem.
I don't know why you would think that. So let me, Sunday morning sarcasm. So let me ask you, did you ever test these, to find out what?
Yeah, Hirschman has sent samples of clots to scientists all over the world.
Okay.
We're actually working with a team of scientists led by Mr. Greg Harrison. He's actually a retired polymer chemist in Sydney, Australia. And we're also working with a gentleman, a neuroscientist in Japan named Dr. Kevin McCarran, not to be confused with Kevin McKernan, who is here at the conference today, and he's the one that was responsible for NSV40 being found in the Pfizer vials. But Kevin McCarran, a neuroscientist, has years of experience, decades in fact, looking at what's called amyloid material, AMYLOID, a fancy term for a misshaped or misfolded protein that's associated with neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia, Creutzfeldt-Jacobs. And we think that's what's happening in this case, but now this is a blood-borne amyloidosis, where our natural blood clotting protein, fibrinogen, is binding with the spike protein from the vaccine and the phospholipid nanoparticles that deliver the mRNA from the vaccine. And instead of converting our natural fibrinogen into a white solid called fibrin, which is used in the normal clotting process, it's converting into this bizarre polymer combination of spike protein with phospholipid nanoparticle with fibrinogen to form these clots.
Just going to take a look. These things are really, I've never actually looked in that place.
That particular one you're holding there, that was taken out of the abdominal aorta, which is one of the largest blood vessels in the body. And that one was actually taken out by a device called a trocar. When an embalmer embalms a body to get it ready for a funeral viewing, he does 2 things. First of all, they'll drain the corpse of the blood and they'll put in formaldehyde. And to do that, they use what's called an injection site point, where usually it's the carotid artery in the neck is where they'll inject the formaldehyde, and then they'll raise the jugular vein, and that'll be where the blood comes out. Richard Hirschman, the embalmer that died suddenly film that I talked to quite a bit, Richard actually likes to use a different injection site point down in the iliac artery that's in the pelvis region. He says he gets a better distribution to the legs and other parts of the body using that injection site point.
Now, did Kevin do a genetic test on this?
A whole battery of tests have been done on this. First test they did was called ICP-MS analysis, inductive coupled plasma mass spectrometry. And that's a test that Mike Adams did very early on with some samples of the clots that he got way back when they first discovered that the clots were happening. And Greg Harrison and his team sent the clots out to several universities, and they corroborated what Mike Adams found. Basically, that checks for the elements in the periodic table that are appearing in the clots. And in the clots, they found very little potassium, magnesium, or iron, which were in high amounts in normal clots. You know, iron is what gives blood its red color, for example. These are light, right? So they contain very little iron. Conversely, they found very high amounts in these clots of elements like phosphorus, sulfur, and even sometimes tin, which was very unusual. So this actually helps support this phosphorylation theory that we have about how the clots are forming. Because what's interesting is back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, there was a similar syndrome that happened. It was called white clot syndrome. You can go find it on the web. And it was being caused, they discovered it was being caused by the anticoagulant heparin. And in the heparin, they deduced there was too high amounts of sulfur. And sulfur was causing white clots to form. So what they did is to solve that is they reduced the molecular weight, the amount of sulfur they were given in the heparin. The problem went away. What's interesting about this is we think this is being driven by possibly sulfur, but probably more likely by phosphorus. That's in the phospholipid nanoparticles. And then the spike protein also becomes phosphorylated and it has a great affinity for our natural fibrinogen. So it bonds and binds it up. And what's really interesting about that is that sulfur and phosphorus sit side by side each other on the periodic table. And they have very many of the same bonding properties. In fact, phosphorus outcompetes sulfur. So that's what's happening here. Other tests that have been done include one called high-performance liquid chromatography testing, where they actually it shows the compounds and talks about the fibrinogen. And one of the interesting things they found there is you can think of your fibrinogen, it comes in 3 chains, an alpha, beta, and gamma chain, and you can think of them as 3 small ropes. And they kind of intertwine to form a stronger rope, fibrin, when you have a normal clot. What's interesting about these clots, and that's usually in a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. In these clots, it's not. It's in a bizarre 9-to-4-to-1 ratio. Yeah, the fibrinogen beta chain is 36% of these clots. The gamma chain is 16%, and the alpha chain is only 4%. So we know something's unusual is happening in the normal conversion of fibrin. And it's being caused, like I said, by the spike protein and the phospholipid nanoparticle.
Well, you've obviously done your homework on this. Have you talked to anybody at the FDA, CDC?
Yeah, and crickets, John. You know, all 3 years I've done my worldwide embalmer blood clot surveys. That's the main area that I've been working in, right? I'm a bean counter. I'm a data analyst. So I've been running these worldwide surveys the last 3 years. I'll run another one here next month to see what the embalmers are seeing through the year of 2025. But in my latest 2024 survey, 83% of the embalmers that responded to that survey, 250 out of the 301 that responded, said they were seeing these white fibrous clots in 27% of the corpses. 1 out of every 4 dead bodies has these things in them.
Have they ever pulled these out of a living person?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that. I got a lucky break last March. A Dr. Dan McDyer, who's an OBGYN in Jacksonville, Florida, who's been seeing what he describes as carnage in his own OBGYN practice, women with premenopausal bleeding, postmenopausal bleeding, stillbirths, miscarriages, tumors. He introduced me to a cardiologist and endovascular specialist friend of his who also lives and works in Jacksonville. And he works in what's called a cath lab, which is short for catheterization lab, where they use flexible catheters to remove clots from living people. That doctor, his name is Dr. Mohanna Basharat, and he's admitted to me that he's been removing these same white fibrous clots from living people for the last 4 years in his cath lab.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He actually sent me an email with a photograph of a white fibrous clot. It was a deep vein thrombosis in a gentleman's leg that he removed. And he also said the angiograms of what it looked like when the clot was still in the leg, and then after it was removed and the blood flow was restored. And he actually refers to these as devious clots.
Oh.
Unfortunately, John, about a month or two later, though, he stopped communicating with me. His last communication said, "Tom, I have been instructed to terminate communications immediately. Sorry for the inconvenience."
By whom?
I assume somebody in his hospital administration, right? They got to him, they said, "Hey, we don't want you talking about this, right? We'll go after your board certifications, your licenses, if you talk about this." So this is unfortunate, right? We have doctors, vascular surgeons, and this didn't surprise me because even the funeral directors and embalmers are reluctant to want to talk about this phenomenon. That's why so few have come forward.
Now, you told me before the interview that you had an update about Tennessee Embalmers Association?
Yeah. Last December, I was contacted by Mr. Taylor Moore, who at that time was the president of the Tennessee Funeral Directors Association, and he invited me to their annual convention.
Cool.
And that took place on June the 8th of this year, 2025, in Franklin, Tennessee, just south of Nashville. And he had me come there because I could tell he was concerned. He said, "Hey, my embalmers and funeral directors are concerned about this. We're into year 5 of this now. We're still seeing these things that we've never seen before.
Yeah.
Could you come talk to us about it?" So I did. I gave an hour presentation there. I also talked about the stats of all the other embalmers around the world that are seeing the clots. And I gave them a briefing on how the clots are forming, which they were, because they're just embalmers. They didn't know why this is happening. So I explained to them the whole thing that we just talked about with the fibrinogen, the spike protein, and the lipid nanoparticles. But then I actually, I took a video of the first 5 minutes of my presentation where I actually asked the embalmers by a show of hands, how many of you are seeing the white fibrous clots? And I've got captured on video, John, 18 of 28 embalmers in that room saying they were seeing the clots in the first half of 2025. So this is a big deal, right? This is the first time we have official acknowledgement from a United States State Funeral Director Association that these are indeed a real phenomenon and that they're prevalent. Because I ran a paper survey at that convention also on June 8th. I figured, hey, I've got a captive audience, why not run a survey in person? And the Tennessee embalmers said they're seeing these clots currently in about 17% of their corpses. About 1 out of every 6 dead bodies has these in them, as well as another phenomenon called microclotting, which is just as dangerous. And those are clots that occur at the capillary level, very small blood vessels, and that can block the exchange of oxygen at the lungs, and then they're carrying that oxygen to all the major organs in your body, including your brain, your eyes. So that's why I think a lot of people these days have brain fog or poor vision problems. That could be an indication that they have microclotting going on inside their head.
Tom, are people walking around with this kind of stuff in them right now?
There's speculation. I think they are, because the fact that Dr. Bashir and the others have actually are removing these from living people.
Yeah.
What I think is happening is that they can develop quickly or slowly, and as long as blood's able to flow around them, you may be asymptomatic. You may feel perfectly fine, but then eventually it blocks completely a vein or an artery, and that's when you get your stroke or heart attack. That's why the movie was called Died Suddenly.
Sure.
People are keeling up. They may feel just fine, then all of a sudden they keel over when completely blocked.
Well, our time is almost up, but Tom, thank you so much for coming out. Is there anything next that you want to share, or where can people follow your work?
My wonderful assistant, Miss Laura Kasner, runs a free Substack that catalogs all of our work, and it's called Clotastrophe.
Okay.
And they can find it at Laura, Laura, Kasner, KASNER.substack.com.
Wonderful. Tom, thank you so much, brother.
Thanks, John. Take care.
I believe in the Constitution. I believe that one case, the right case, can change the world. If you believe this too, Freedom Counsel is for you. Pursuing a major case can be overwhelming, but we provide a community of practice so that you have the resources available to support your case. My name is Warner Mendenhall, and we are Freedom Counsel. Join Freedom Counsel today. freedomcounsel.org.